Welcome back to Wartime Heroes. This channel is about real conviction, about the moments when a man doesn't just follow orders, he follows his conscience. Tonight's story isn't about a famous charge, it's not about machine guns, it's not even about killing, it's about healing. It's about a faith so deep that it turned the deadliest battlefield in the Pacific into a place of miracles. When his fellow soldiers said, "Pick up a rifle," he said, "I won't kill." When they called him a coward, he walked straight into enemy fire just to save lives. If you respect that kind of courage, hit that like button. If you believe this story deserves to be heard, make sure to subscribe, because this is the kind of legend they don't teach in Sunday school, but we tell it here. Before the bullets and the bloodshed, before Okinawa became a graveyard, there was a quiet farm in Virginia where a young boy learned the most dangerous lesson of his life: that violence solves nothing. But what no one knew then was that this lesson, this conviction, would one day save dozens of American lives in the most impossible way imaginable. This is the story of Desmond Doss, the man who proved that sometimes the greatest act of war is refusing to fight. It was 1919. The Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia stretched endlessly under a gray morning sky. In the small town of Lynchburg, Thomas Doss worked the railroad while his wife Bertha raised their 3 children in a modest wooden house that creaked with every step. Life was simple, life was hard, and for young Desmond, life was about to teach him a lesson that would change everything. The Doss family wasn't wealthy, but they were devoted. Seventh-day Adventists who believed deeply in the commandments, especially the 6th one: "Thou shalt not kill." It wasn't just a rule they followed on Sundays. It was a way of life that governed every decision, every breath, every heartbeat. Desmond was 7 years old when he first saw the picture. It hung on the wall of their living room, a framed illustration of the 10 Commandments. Moses holding the stone tablets, and at the bottom a scene that would haunt and guide him for the rest of his life. Cain standing over his brother Abel, blood on his hands, the first murder in human history. Below it in bold letters, "Thou shalt not kill." His mother Bertha would find him staring at that picture for hours. She'd ask him what he was thinking, and he'd point to Cain and say, "Mama, why did he do that? Why did he hurt his brother?" And she would kneel down beside him and say, "Because he forgot that we're all family, Desmond. We're all God's children." But it wasn't just a picture on the wall that shaped young Desmond. It was what he witnessed in his own home. Thomas Doss had a drinking problem. When the whiskey took hold, he became someone else entirely. Violent, angry, unpredictable. Desmond watched his father throw punches at his mother, watched her cry in silence, watched his older brother Harold cower in the corner, and in those dark moments something crystallized in the boy's mind. Violence destroys. Violence breaks families. Violence breaks souls. One night when Desmond was 13, the lesson became personal. Thomas had been drinking again, and an argument with his brother escalated into something deadly. Thomas grabbed a pistol from the kitchen drawer and pointed it directly at his own brother's chest. The room went silent except for the sound of heavy breathing and the tick of the old clock on the mantel. Desmond's mother stepped between them, her voice shaking but firm. "Thomas, give me that gun, please." For what felt like hours, the three adults stood frozen. Then slowly Thomas lowered the weapon and handed it to his wife. Later that night, Bertha took the gun and gave it to young Desmond. "Take this," she said. "Hide it somewhere your father will never find it." Desmond took the cold metal in his hands and felt its weight. This thing, this instrument of death, had almost destroyed his family. He buried it deep in the woods behind their house, and as he covered it with dirt and leaves, he made a promise. He would never, ever take a human life, no matter what. The years passed quietly. Desmond grew tall and strong, working construction jobs around Lynchburg, sending money home to help his family. He was known as a gentle soul, someone who would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't swear. He went to church every Saturday and read his Bible every night before bed. His friends thought he was odd, maybe even weak, but they didn't understand the strength it took to live by such unwavering principles. Then came December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. The radio crackled with news of the attack, and suddenly every young man in America faced the same choice: fight or be labeled a coward. Desmond listened to President Roosevelt's speech, heard the call to arms, felt the weight of duty pressing down on his shoulders, but he also felt something else, the same conviction that had guided him since childhood. He would serve his country. He would do his duty, but he would not kill. His friends thought he was crazy. "Doss, you can't go to war without a rifle. That's suicide." His father was furious. "Boy, you're going to get yourself killed out there, and for what? Some Sunday school lesson?" Even some members of his own church questioned his decision, but Desmond had made up his mind. He would enlist as a conscientious objector, serve as a medic, and save lives instead of taking them. The enlistment office in Lynchburg was packed with young men eager to fight. When Desmond stepped up to the desk and told the recruiting sergeant he wanted to serve as a non-combatant, the man looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "Son, we're fighting a war, not running a hospital." But the paperwork was legal. The Selective Service Act allowed for conscientious objectors to serve in non-combat roles. Reluctantly, the sergeant stamped Desmond's papers and handed him his orders. Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Basic training would begin in 2 weeks. As Desmond walked out of that building, he had no idea what he was walking into. He thought the hardest part was over. He thought his fellow soldiers would respect his choice, maybe even admire his convictions. He thought wrong. The real battle was just beginning. And it wouldn't be fought on some distant battlefield. It would be fought right there in boot camp against the very men he was supposed to call brothers. Fort Jackson, South Carolina, 1942. The air was thick with humidity and hostility. Desmond Doss stepped off the transport truck and into a world that had no place for conscientious objectors. Around him, young men from every corner of America were being molded into killing machines. They learned to strip rifles in seconds, to bayonet straw dummies, to think of the enemy as less than human. And there was Desmond, refusing to even touch a weapon, carrying nothing but a Bible and an unshakable faith. The harassment started immediately. His drill sergeant, a combat veteran named Sergeant Howell, took one look at Desmond's file and decided to make an example of him. "So you're the Holy Joe, huh?" Think you're too good to fight for your country? The other recruits followed Howell's lead. They called him names, they spit in his food. They threw boots at his head while he knelt beside his bunk to pray. One night they even tried to beat him unconscious with a sock full of soap bars. But Desmond never fought back, never raised his voice, never showed anything but kindness in return for cruelty. "Why don't you just quit?" his bunkmate asked him one evening after a particularly brutal day of training. "Nobody would blame you. This isn't worth it." Desmond looked up from his Bible, his face bruised but his eyes clear. "Because somebody has to help the wounded. When the shooting starts, somebody has to be there to patch them up and get them home to their families." It wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about being right. It was about love. The kind of love that runs toward danger instead of away from it. The training intensified as weeks turned into months. Physical conditioning, medical procedures, battlefield first aid. Desmond excelled at everything except the one thing the Army demanded most: weapons training. Every morning at 0600, the company would line up on the rifle range. Every morning, Desmond would stand at attention while his fellow soldiers fired round after round into distant targets. And every morning, Sergeant Howell would scream in his face, "Doss, you worthless piece of garbage! Pick up that rifle or get out of my army." But Desmond had found something unexpected in the chaos of basic training: purpose. While other recruits struggled with the medical training, Desmond absorbed every lesson like a sponge. How to stop arterial bleeding, how to treat shock, how to carry a wounded man across rough terrain. The same hands that refused to hold a weapon became expert at saving lives. The same mind that rejected violence became a library of life-saving knowledge. His commanding officers didn't know what to do with him. Technically, he was within his rights as a conscientious objector. The paperwork was legal, properly filed, approved by higher command, but practically he was a nightmare. A soldier who wouldn't soldier, a warrior who wouldn't fight. They tried everything to break him: extra duty, kitchen patrol, latrine cleaning. They even tried to have him discharged on psychiatric grounds, claiming any man who refused to defend himself must be mentally unfit for service. The psychiatric evaluation took place on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in September. Desmond sat across from a military psychiatrist, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who studied him like a specimen under a microscope. "Private Doss, do you understand that your fellow soldiers will depend on you in combat? That your refusal to carry a weapon could get them killed?" Desmond nodded calmly. "Yes, sir, I understand. But I also understand that my job is to keep them alive, not to kill the enemy. When they get hit, they're going to need someone who knows how to put them back together." The doctor scribbled notes, asked more questions, tried to find some crack in Desmond's resolve. But there wasn't one. This wasn't the delusion of a coward or the philosophy of a weakling. This was the unbreakable conviction of a man who had seen violence destroy his own family and refused to be part of that destruction ever again. After 2 hours of probing, the psychiatrist closed his file and made his recommendation. Private Doss was mentally sound, legally within his rights, and fit for duty as a non-combatant medic. The news spread through the barracks like wildfire. The Holy Joe was staying. Some of the men were disgusted, others were secretly relieved. If shooting started, they wanted someone around who actually knew how to stop bleeding. But the harassment didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. They stole his Bible. They urinated in his boots. They made sure he got the worst details, the longest hours, the hardest jobs. And through it all, Desmond never complained, never reported them, never asked for special treatment. One night, 3 months into training, everything changed. Private Jackson, a kid from Alabama who had been one of Desmond's worst tormentors, collapsed during a late-night training exercise. Heat exhaustion. His body temperature spiked. His pulse became erratic. He started convulsing. The other soldiers panicked, shouted for help, ran in circles. But Desmond dropped to his knees beside Jackson and went to work. He checked vitals, elevated his legs, loosened his uniform, applied cold compresses to his neck and wrists. He stayed with Jackson through the night, monitoring his breathing, adjusting his position, making sure he didn't slip into shock. By morning, Jackson was stable. The medics who arrived said Desmond's quick thinking had probably saved his life. And something shifted in the barracks that day. Not complete acceptance, not sudden friendship, but a grudging recognition. Maybe the Holy Joe wasn't completely useless after all. Maybe having someone around who actually cared about keeping people alive wasn't such a bad thing. The months of training culminated in war games, massive exercises designed to simulate real combat conditions. Desmond was assigned to Bravo Company 307th Infantry Regiment, 77th Infantry Division. They called themselves the Statue of Liberty Division, and they were bound for the Pacific Theater. The war games were brutal. Soldiers crawled through mud, dodged simulated artillery, practiced assault tactics on mock enemy positions. And in the middle of it all was Desmond, unarmed but indispensable, treating simulated wounds with the same intensity he would bring to real ones. Captain Glover, the company commander, watched Desmond work during one particularly intense exercise. A soldier had twisted his ankle badly during a river crossing. While other men pressed forward with the mission, Desmond stayed behind, fashioned a splint from branches and medical tape, and helped the injured man across rough terrain to the aid station. It took him 3 hours. He missed the rest of the exercise, but he got his man to safety. That evening, Captain Glover pulled Desmond aside. "A private, I'll be honest with you. I don't understand your beliefs. I don't agree with your position. But I've watched you for months, and I've never seen anyone work harder or care more about the welfare of his fellow soldiers." He paused, studying Desmond's face in the fading light. "We're shipping out to the Pacific in 2 weeks. It's going to be hell over there. Men are going to die, but I'm glad you'll be with us. We're going to need someone like you." 2 weeks later, Desmond stood on the deck of a transport ship, watching the American coastline disappear into the distance. Around him, hundreds of soldiers cleaned weapons, wrote letters home, tried to prepare themselves for what was coming. But Desmond just stood at the rail, Bible in his hands, praying for the strength to do what he believed God was calling him to do. He had no idea that his greatest test was waiting for him on a bloody ridge in Okinawa. He had no idea that his refusal to kill was about to make him the most unlikely hero in American military history. The journey across the Pacific would take weeks. Weeks of seasickness, homesickness, and the growing certainty that many of the young men on that ship would never see home again. But for Desmond Doss, the journey was just beginning. The boy who had buried his father's gun in the Virginia woods was about to face the ultimate test of his convictions on the deadliest battlefield of World War II. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly in all directions. A blue wasteland dotted with islands that would soon become synonymous with death. Desmond spent those long weeks aboard the transport ship studying field medicine manuals, memorizing pressure points, practicing knots that could save a life in seconds. While other soldiers played cards or cleaned weapons, he sat quietly in corners, preparing his mind for the horror that awaited. The 77th Infantry Division was bound for Guam first, then Leyte in the Philippines. These weren't training exercises anymore. These were real battles against an enemy that fought with fanatical determination, that preferred death to surrender, that had turned every island in the Pacific into a fortress. The stories filtering back from other units were nightmarish. Kamikaze attacks, banzai charges, soldiers dying not just from bullets but from disease, exhaustion, and the psychological weight of endless combat. Guam came and went in a blur of gunfire and casualties. Desmond's first taste of real combat. He watched men he'd trained with for months fall to Japanese sniper fire, watched them cry for their mothers as life leaked out of them onto foreign soil. But he also discovered something about himself that no amount of training could have prepared him for. When the bullets started flying, when other men dove for cover, Desmond ran toward the wounded. Not away from danger, but straight into it. This is the story of Desmond Doss, the conscientious objector who became a Medal of Honor recipient. The man who proved that conviction isn't weakness, it's strength. That faith isn't foolishness, it's power. From a broken home in Virginia to the bloodiest battlefield in the Pacific, Desmond never wavered. He never compromised. He never forgot that every life has value. Thank you for watching Wartime Heroes. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that courage comes in many forms.